The massive Galactic Council chamber buzzed with contemptuous laughter. Ambassador of the Empire stood at the central podium, his four arms gesturing dismissively at the holographic display floating before the assembly. The image showed a human vessel, if one could even call it that. The ship looked like someone had welded random pieces of scrap metal together and painted it an ugly shade of gray. "Behold," announced, his voice dripping with mockery, "the latest addition to Earth's so-called defense fleet. The humans have named it Persistence." The chamber erupted in fresh waves of laughter. In the observation gallery, Captain Sarah stood rigid, her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Beside her, Admiral placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. They had come to the Council seeking trade agreements, not to become entertainment for 100 different alien species. The ambassador continued his presentation, zooming in on various aspects of the human ship. "Notice the primitive fusion reactor's technology we abandoned 3,000 years ago. The hull plating appears to be nothing more than compressed titanium alloy. And these," he pointed to what looked like random protrusions along the ship's surface, "we can only assume are their weapon systems, though our scanners show nothing more threatening than basic particle accelerators." A serpentine delegate slithered forward. "How many of these vessels do the humans possess?" "Our intelligence suggests they have constructed 12 such ships," replied. "They call it their ghost fleet, though I assure you, the only thing ghostly about them is how quickly they'll vanish when faced with real warships." The crystalline form of a celestial prime flickered with amusement. 12 ships. The Empire maintains 8,000 warships. The Confederacy commands 6,000. Even the minor species here possess fleets numbering in the hundreds. And the humans dare to seek membership in the Galactic Council with 12 ugly boxes. Sarah's hands balled into fists, but's grip on her shoulder tightened. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let them laugh." Down on the main floor, a young diplomat raised a tentacle. "Perhaps we should not judge so hastily. The humans did manage to achieve faster-than-light travel independently." "By accident?" interrupted. "Their entire FTL discovery was a laboratory mishap. They can't even properly explain the physics behind their own drive systems. They stumble around the galaxy like younglings who found their parents' weapon locker." The shrunk back, properly chastised. No one wanted to appear sympathetic to the primitive newcomers. Sarah watched as delegate after delegate took turns mocking humanity's achievements. They laughed at Earth's single orbital shipyard, comparing it to the 1,000-platform construction arrays of the major powers. They ridiculed human shield technology, pointing out how their best defenses couldn't stop a single plasma torpedo from a destroyer. They even mocked the design aesthetic, calling human ships flying scrap heaps and monuments to bad engineering. The worst part was that, from a certain perspective, they weren't entirely wrong. Compared to the sleek crystalline vessels of the Celestials or the biomechanical marvels of the, human ships did look primitive. The Ghost Fleet had been built on a shoestring budget, using whatever materials Earth could scavenge or produce. Every credit had been stretched, every corner cut that wouldn't compromise core functionality. But what the aliens didn't understand, what they couldn't understand from their position of abundance and technological superiority, was that those 12 ugly ships represented the dreams and determination of 10 billion humans. Each welded seam was placed by workers who'd volunteered double shifts. Each system was designed by engineers who'd worked for a fraction of what they could have earned in the private sector. Those ships weren't pretty because pretty cost money, and every saved credit meant better life support, stronger engines, or more redundant systems. "The humans request full membership in the Galactic Council," announced, returning to the formal agenda. "This would grant them access to our trade networks, our technology databases, and our collective defense treaties. It would make them equals to species who traveled the stars for. I ask you, distinguished delegates, does anyone here seriously believe these primitives deserve such honor?" The chamber fell silent for a moment, and Sarah held her breath. Maybe someone would speak up. Maybe someone would remember that every species had once been new to the galactic stage. "I move to table the human membership application indefinitely," the delegate hissed. "Let them return when they have something more to offer than scrap metal and enthusiasm." "Seconded," the Celestial Prime harmonized. "All in favor?" asked. A forest of appendages, tentacles, and energy fields rose in unanimous agreement. Not a single delegate voted against the motion. Admiral tugged gently at Sarah's arm. "Come on, Captain, we've seen enough." As they walked through the station's gleaming corridors toward their shuttle, Sarah finally spoke. "They're making a mistake, Admiral, a big one." Nodded slowly. "They are, but they won't realize it until it's too late." "The Ghost will do what it was designed to do," interrupted. "Those aren't warships, Captain, they never were." Sarah frowned. "Sir." The Admiral smiled grimly. "Did you really think we'd show our hand to a room full of potential enemies? The Persistence and her sisters are exactly what they appear to be: obsolete, underpowered, and ugly. The real fleet. Well, let's just say the R&D department has been very busy with those accidental FTL discoveries." They reached the shuttle bay where their small transport waited. As the airlock sealed behind them, turned to the pilot. "Set course for Earth, best speed." "Yes, sir. How did the meeting go?" Settled into his chair. "Exactly as planned, Lieutenant, exactly as planned." Through the shuttle's viewport, Sarah could see the massive forms of warships patrolling the station. Each one was 2 kilometers of gleaming death, bristling with weapons that could crack small moons. They moved with the lazy confidence of apex predators who'd never met a serious challenge. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, "when they find out what we've really built—" "They'll do exactly what arrogant powers always do when faced with something new," replied. "They'll attack first and ask questions later, and when they do—" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, let's just say humanity has gotten very good at working with scraps. Imagine what we can do when we're not pretending to be harmless." As their shuttle departed, neither human noticed the small drone that detached from the Persistence's hull and began scanning the assembled alien fleet. Its sensors were disguised as primitive radar, the kind of system that would make any advanced species laugh. But beneath that facade, quantum analyzers mapped every ship, every weapon, every shield frequency. The Ghost fleet might be a joke, but the ghosts they carried were all too real. And soon, very soon, the galaxy would learn why humanity had named their ugly little ships after concepts like persistence, defiance, and vengeance. In the council chamber, the laughter continued. The assembled species had moved on to other business, already forgetting about the primitive humans and their pathetic 12 ships. After all, what could a species that had barely left their home system possibly do to threaten the established order? They would find out soon enough. 3 months after the humiliation at the Galactic Council, the border tensions finally snapped. It started, as most wars do, with a misunderstanding that everyone was eager to exploit. The human mining vessel Rockhound had been working a small asteroid field in what Earth's charts showed as unclaimed space. The Empire disagreed. When the Rockhound refused to abandon what represented 6 months of hard labor and invested resources, they decided to make an example. The destroyer Blade of Conquest dropped out of hyperspace with its weapons already charging. Captain stood on his bridge, mandibles clicking with anticipation. "Target the human vessel. 1 shot should be sufficient." "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting one of those human warships approaching. It's the Persistence." Laughed, "The rust bucket from the council meeting? This will be even better than I hoped. Open a channel to the Empire. I want this broadcast live. Let everyone see what happens to species who don't know their place." Across the void, Captain Sarah stood on the bridge of the Persistence. The ship still looked like assembled scrap metal, still bore the ugly gray paint that had drawn so much mockery. But something was different about her crew. They moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of countless drills, endless preparation. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "the ship is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're making this a show." "Let them," replied. "Helm, continue approach at 1/4 thrust. Let them think we're struggling to keep up." "Ma'am," her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Torres, spoke quietly, "the Rockhound is directly in their line of fire. 800 souls aboard." "I know," his voice was steady. "Trust the plan, Commander. All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for Protocol 7. Throughout the ship, crew members stopped what they were doing and began moving to specific positions. Blast doors that appeared rusted shut suddenly slid open on hidden maintenance. Power readings that had seemed stable for months began to fluctuate in precise patterns. On the destroyer grew impatient. "Why haven't they raised their shields? Are their systems so primitive they don't even detect our weapons lock?" "Unknown, sir. Their power readings are erratic. It might be fear response affecting their inferior reactor." "Perfect," activated the fleet-wide communication. Attention all vessels of the Empire. Witness now the fate of those who dare intrude upon our territory. Watch as their warship crumbles before our might. The massive plasma cannon on the blade of conquest swiveled toward the Persistence. Energy built to a crescendo, ready to unleash destruction that could gut a station. Fire commanded. The plasma bolt streaked across space, a bar of superheated death moving at significant fraction of light speed. It should have torn through the Persistence like tissue paper. Instead, something impossible happened. The ugly hull of the human ship suddenly wasn't there anymore. Where solid metal had been, there was now a ghostly outline, as if the ship existed in several dimensions simultaneously. The plasma bolt passed harmlessly through the spectral image, continuing on into empty space. Before could even process what he'd seen, the Persistence again. But now it was different. The rust on its hull fell away like a shed skin, revealing a surface that seemed to drink in light. The random protrusions extended, showing themselves as weapon systems unlike anything in the Galactic Council's databases. What is that?" Tactical officer stammered. His voice came over the communication channel, calm and cold. "Vessel, you have fired upon a ship of Earth's fleet. This action is considered an act of war. You have one opportunity to power down your weapons and surrender." His mandibles spread in rage. "Surrender? To you, all ships converge on this sector, destroy that abomination." Across the system, vessels began dropping out of hyperspace. 5 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and a battleship enough firepower to sterilize a planet. They formed up in attack formation, confident in their numerical superiority. "Captain," Torres reported, 8 vessels on approach. Should I signal the rest of the Ghost Fleet?" "Not yet," replied. "Let's show them what one rust bucket can do, activate the Prometheus core." Deep in the Persistence's heart, something awakened. It wasn't technology any species in the Galactic Council would recognize. It was something born from humanity's unique understanding of spacetime, refined through 1,000 accidents and 10,000 experiments. The humans called it dimensional phase shifting, though that barely scratched the surface of what it actually did. The fleet opened fire as one. Plasma bolts, antimatter torpedoes, graviton beams, enough combined firepower to crack a small moon. All of it passed through empty space as the Persistence flickered in and out of phase, never quite where the targeting computers said it should be. Then the human ship returned fire. Weapons that had been hidden beneath false hull plating spoke with voices of pure destruction. Not plasma or antimatter, but something far more terrifying, directed dimensional tears that ignored shields like they didn't exist. The first shot hit a destroyer amidships. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ship simply ceased. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from reality as if it had never existed at all. "Impossible," screamed. All ships' maximum firepower overwhelmed their systems. But the Persistence was no longer alone. One by one, 11 other rust buckets dropped out of a kind of hyperspace that didn't even have sensors for. The entire Ghost Fleet had arrived, and as one, they shed their disguises. What emerged from beneath the false hulls was the product of humanity at its most desperate and brilliant. Ships that existed partially in normal space, and partially in dimensions the other species couldn't even perceive. Weapons that turned the enemy's own mass against them. Shields that didn't block attacks, but simply convinced those attacks they wanted to be somewhere else. The battle, if it could even be called, that lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it was over, the fleet was gone. Not debris, not wreckage, just gone. The only evidence they'd ever existed was the sensor logs that no one would quite believe. Opened a channel to the Galactic Council. She knew they were watching. They had made sure of that with their broadcast. "This is Captain of the Earth ship Persistence. The fleet attacked human civilians and has been neutralized. We are prepared to accept their surrender, along with reparations for the attempted murder of our mining crew." The channel erupted with 100 different voices, all shouting variations of the same questions. How? What? Impossible. But wasn't finished. "We came to you 3 months ago seeking partnership. You mocked us. You laughed at our ships, our technology, our dreams. But here's something you should understand about humanity. We've spent our entire history turning mockery into motivation. You saw scrap metal and obsolete systems because that's what we wanted you to see." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The Ghost Fleet is just the beginning. Earth has been very busy since we discovered FTL. We've learned that in space, like on Earth, it's not the biggest or the prettiest that survives. It's the most adaptable. And humans, we've been adapting to things trying to kill us since before we came down from the trees. Admiral's face appeared on a subsidiary screen. Captain, they are mobilizing their sector fleet. The Celestials are powering up their reality anchors. Let them come, replied loud enough for the council to hear. We have 48 more ships ready to deploy, and those are just the ones we're willing to show you. On the bridge of the Persistence, Lieutenant Commander Torres studied his tactical display. Captain, should we return to defensive positions? No, said, settling into her command chair. We're done hiding. Signal all Ghost Fleet vessels maintain position. Let's see if any of them are stupid enough to test us again. In the Galactic Council chamber, panic reigned. Delegates who had laughed at the primitive humans now scrambled to understand what they'd just witnessed. How had a species that couldn't even properly explain their own FTL drive created weapons that known physics? Ambassador, who had so confidently mocked the humans, found himself staring at sensor data that made no sense. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions. Weapons that deleted matter from reality. Technology that shouldn't be possible for another 1,000 years of development. We need to reconsider the human membership application, a delegate hissed nervously. Reconsider? The Celestial Prime's crystalline form flickered with agitation. They just destroyed 8 warships in under a minute. Destroyed is the wrong word, a scientific advisor corrected, reading the scans. The ships weren't destroyed, they were removed from existence. We don't even have words for what we just saw. In the asteroid field where it all began, the mining vessel Rockhound continued its work, protected now by something far more powerful than military might fear. The galaxy had learned that humanity's reach exceeded its grasp, but in the most terrifying way possible. They'd assumed human technology was primitive because it looked primitive. They'd assumed human ships were weak because they appeared weak. They'd assumed humanity would always be playing catch-up to species with a spacefaring experience. They'd assumed wrong. And in assuming wrong, they'd given humanity exactly what it needed: time. Time to build in secret. Time to innovate without interference. Time to prepare for the day when the mockery would stop and the fear would begin. That day had arrived. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Where once laughter had echoed at humanity's expense, now only the hum of life support systems broke the silence. Every delegate, from the mightiest empire to the smallest protectorate, watched the holographic display showing the aftermath of what historians would later call the 47-second war. Ambassador stood at the same podium where he had mocked humanity 3 months ago. His forearms hung limp, his usual arrogance replaced by something alien species rarely showed: humility. The Empire formally surrenders to Earth and her forces. We request terms. Sarah appeared on the main screen, still on the bridge of the Persistence. Behind her, the Ghost Fleet hung in space like silent sentinels, their true forms revealed. Ships that seemed to bend reality around them, that existed partially in dimensions the Council couldn't even measure. Captain continued, his voice carefully measured. We acknowledge our aggression. We acknowledge our miscalculation. What does Earth demand? Leaned back in her chair, letting the silence stretch. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of 10 billion humans who'd been dismissed as primitive. First, let's be clear about something. Earth doesn't want your territory. We don't want your resources. We came here seeking partnership, trade, and peaceful coexistence. You responded with mockery and violence. The delegate slithered forward. Then what do you want? Changes, replied. Starting with the immediate cessation of the classification system that labels species as primitive or advanced. Every spacefaring civilization will have equal voice in the Council. That's unprecedented, a Celestial Prime harmonized. The hierarchy has existed for 10,000 years. And in those 10,000 years, how many species have you dismissed? How many potential allies have you turned into enemies? How many innovations have you missed because you couldn't see past your own arrogance? Questions hung in the air, unanswered because everyone knew the answers would be damning. Admiral appeared on a secondary screen. The Earth government has authorized me to present our full terms. 1. Immediate recognition of Earth as a full Council member with all associated rights. 2. Reparations from the Empire equivalent to the cost of our fleet development, to be paid to a fund for emerging species technological development. 3. The establishment of a new council protocol where any species achieving FTL travel is automatically granted protective status and mentorship, not mockery. And if we refuse? The question came from a Dominion representative, one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then we'll leave. We'll take our ghost fleet, our dimensional technology, and our primitive innovations, and we'll go. But ask yourself, do you really want humanity as an enemy? We built all of this in less than a decade while you were laughing at us. Imagine what we could build if we were actually trying to hurt you. The threat wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. Every delegate had seen the sensor readings. Ships that could phase in and out of reality. Weapons that deleted matter from existence. Technology that violated half the laws of physics the Council held sacred. There's one more thing, added. We want full disclosure on any other species you've dismissed or ignored. How many civilizations have you laughed out of this chamber? How many potential allies have you driven away with your arrogance? That would be hundreds, the delegate admitted quietly. Perhaps thousands over the. Then we have work to do, said. Earth's ghost fleet will begin immediate outreach to these species. We'll offer them what you didn't respect, partnership, and the chance to prove themselves without mockery. His mandibles clicked nervously. You're restructuring the entire galactic order. No, corrected. We're fixing it. You built a system based on technological superiority and age. But the universe doesn't care how long you've had FTL. It doesn't care how pretty your ships are. It cares about innovation, determination, and the ability to adapt. Humanity spent 50,000 years learning that lesson the hard way. Now it's your turn. Over the next hours, the details were hammered out. The Empire agreed to the reparations, though they struggled to understand how humanity had achieved so much with so little resources. The Council voted, unanimously this time, to accept Earth's membership and implement the new protocols. But the real change came in the weeks that followed. As humanity's ghost fleet spread throughout the galaxy, they found species after species who'd been dismissed by the Council. Whose biological ships were laughed at until humanity showed them how to merge their biotechnology with dimensional phasing. The silent ones, whose communication methods were deemed too primitive until human linguists cracked their quantum entanglement language and discovered they had been trying to warn about a coming extragalactic threat for centuries. Each species brought something unique. Each had innovations that the Council had ignored because they didn't fit the established paradigm. And humanity, with its talent for seeing potential where others saw only scrap, helped them all realize their capabilities. The persistence became a symbol, but not of human dominance, turned it into a training vessel where species could learn about dimensional technology while sharing their own innovations. The ugly gray hull was kept deliberately unchanged, a reminder that appearances meant nothing in the vast cosmos. 6 months after the 47 Second War stood once again in the council chamber. But this time, the gallery was full of new faces species who'd been given a chance because humanity had forced the galaxy to change its perspective. Ambassador, the new council president, whose living ship pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, called the session to order. The floor is yours. Looked around the chamber, seeing fear in some faces, respect in others, and curiosity in most. 6 months ago, you laughed at our ships. You mocked our technology. You dismissed our dreams. But that mockery taught us something valuable. The most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. She activated a holographic display showing the original Ghost fleet, still ugly, still looking like flying scrap. These ships were never about war. They were about survival. Every species here knows what it's like to be small, to be overlooked, to be told you don't matter. Humanity simply refused to accept that judgment. The display shifted, showing the true fleet, not 12 ships, but hundreds, each incorporating technology from dozens of species. This is what cooperation looks like. This is what happens when you stop laughing and start listening. They taught us about biological adaptation. The silent ones showed us how to detect threats we couldn't even perceive. The miners of Keld shared their materials technology. Every species brought something unique, something the old council would have dismissed. Now serving a greatly reduced role, raised one arm. What about the weapons, the dimensional erasure technology? His expression grew serious. Those were born from desperation, from the knowledge that we had one chance to prove ourselves or be forever dismissed. But here's the thing about ultimate weapons. They're ultimately useless if your goal is peace. So Earth makes this pledge. Our dimensional weapons will be shared with the Council, but only for defense against external threats, never for use against member species. You would share such power? The Celestial Prime's harmonics conveyed disbelief. Power shared is power, replied. That's another lesson humanity learned the hard way. We survived on Earth not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we cooperated. Because we took the weak and made them strong, took the isolated and made them community. She paused, looking directly at the delegates who had laughed the loudest 3 months ago. You mocked our ships for being ugly, but beauty is just symmetry and polish. Strength. Strength is taking whatever you have and making it work. It's welding scrap metal into something that can protect your people. It's turning laboratory accidents into revolutionary technology. It's facing the laughter of the galaxy and saying, watch this. The Council voted that day to restructure completely. The hierarchical system that had persisted was replaced with a cooperative framework. Species were valued not for how long they'd been in space, but for what they could contribute. Technology was shared more freely, with safeguards, but without the old restrictions that had kept younger species dependent. And the Ghost Fleet? It grew, not just in numbers, but in diversity. Ships that were part biological, part mechanical, part dimensional. Vessels crewed by multiple species, each contributing their unique perspectives. The ugly aesthetics became a badge of honor, function over form, innovation over tradition. Years later, when the extragalactic threat the Silent Ones had warned about finally arrived, the galaxy was ready. Not because of any single species' technology, but because mockery had been replaced with mentorship, dismissal with cooperation. The invaders were powerful, ancient, and absolutely convinced of their superiority. They looked at the assembled fleet ships of every shape, size, and configuration, and they laughed. They laughed at the patchwork vessels, the mixed crews, the seemingly chaotic battle formations. They laughed right up until the moment they were erased from reality by weapons they couldn't comprehend, wielded by species they dismissed as primitive, commanded by humans who'd learned that the best response to mockery was devastating success. Standing on the bridge of the Persistence, now Admiral watched the invaders flee back to whatever distant galaxy they'd come from. Around her, crew members from 15 different species worked in perfect harmony. They laughed, Lieutenant Torres, now Captain Torres of his own ghost ship, commented over the comm. They always do, replied, right up until they don't. The Ghost Fleet turned back toward Council space, their ugly hulls from battle but unbroken. They'd been mocked, dismissed, and underestimated. But in the end, they'd done what humanity always did. They'd endured, adapted, and overcome. And in a galaxy that had learned to look beyond appearances, that was the most beautiful thing of all.